Well, it's been 10 very long and very bumpy years, but the current DC Extended Universe is coming to an end. In fact, depending on what way you look at it, you could argue that it's already ended and we're now just in the transitional period. But even though the franchise is coming to an end, it's hard to deny what an impact the DCEU has had. The franchise was always very hit or miss, but it had a habit of taking characters the mainstream movie-going public weren't overly familiar with and made an impression that will likely last for years to come. You want proof? You remember how like 10 years ago there was kind of a stigma towards Aquaman as just the guy who talks to fish? Flash forward to 2018 when he got a pretty good movie of his own, and nobody really seems to say that anymore. Although we haven't seen the reaction to Aquaman 2 yet, God knows if that's gonna do him any favors. Especially since after the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker, which were both really good, the DCEU had been on a bit of a losing streak, which leads us to today's subject, The Flash.
Shit, I'm in so much trouble.
I admit I'm not the most familiar with the Flash as a character. I haven't read any of the comics besides Flashpoint. Most of the DC media I've seen him in relegates him to a minor supporting role. I haven't even watched the CW show. I want to watch it, but I have a huge backlog of shows I want to watch at some point, such as... Suffice it to say, the DCEU version of The Flash is the one that I'm the most familiar with. And if this particular movie is the impression DC wanted to leave, I gotta say they really left a lot to be desired. What do I mean by that? Well, think about it this way. What is the most fundamental aspect of The Flash that even a basic bitch like me would be aware of? That's right, he's fast.
That feels like an oversimplification.
If you're going to see a movie about The Flash, chances are you're watching it because you want to see a guy who runs at super speed and uses that to save the world. And the movie gives us a glimpse of that. And I must stress that, a glimpse. But what little we see of him isn't really all that impressive. For example, take a look at the first time we see him run.
Flash! Hi.
Sorry, the first time we see him run. We get this big build-up where Barry Allen's perception of the road stretches out, and then the payoff of it snapping back like a rubber band as he zooms forward. Okay, so far so good, but then we see him running in slow motion. As you can see, DC tries their hand at the Quicksilver-esque slow motion scenes from X-Men Days of Future Past and X-Men Apocalypse. The thing is though, even though Quicksilver's movement in those scenes was slowed down to a comprehensible pace, there was still a lot of variation in speed. We see plenty of instances of him zipping around so that even in slow motion we get to properly experience the quickness of the character. In The Flash though, the entire set piece is in literal slow motion. I don't mean the environment is in slow motion while Barry appears to be moving normally. I mean they filmed Ezra Miller the actor and put that footage in slow motion, which, you know, inherently guts the scene of the fast pace it's supposed to have. To be fair, X-Men did incorporate this kind of thing as well, but it was used in moderation. They would only show Quicksilver in slow motion for a few seconds at a time so that when they did, it would enhance the feeling of acceleration for when he speeds up again. Oh, and also the Quicksilver scenes didn't render their CGI on a PS3. Bit of a difference in technique there. Another really missed opportunity is that the opening scene goes a little deeper into this line from Justice League.
It's like this layer of dimensional reality, and it seems to manipulate space-time. It causes me to burn a tremendous amount of calories, so I am just a black hole of snacks.
This movie explores that a little bit with him trying to use his powers early in the morning before he's had a chance to eat anything that day. Meaning he has to find some food while in the middle of a life or death scenario so that he can use his powers properly. That's genuinely a cool idea. It makes total sense that a superpower based on physicality and athleticism would have this type of limitation. Plus, it humanizes Barry and his powers. Like, yeah, he's a member of the Justice League and capable of doing amazing things, but he still finds it harder to do them if he hasn't had breakfast. But while I like the idea, the movie just doesn't take advantage of it. If you've seen Phil Mendo's video about The Flash, he briefly mentioned that the opening scene introduces this only for it to never become relevant again. But I'd like to take that point one step further and say, it's barely even relevant to the scene it appears in. Oh no, Barry has to save these falling babies, but his empty stomach is slowing him down. Doesn't matter. There's a vending machine right there and that solves the problem pretty much instantly. You could very easily cut the hunger element out of the action scene and things would play out pretty much exactly the same. Also, there's this scene at the beginning of the movie where the Flash asks a stranger for a chocolate bar to give him some energy. They throw it toward him, but he gets distracted. And then he rushes off to Gotham where the fight is happening and just leaves the chocolate bar lying on the road for no reason, like it's the gasoline from Birdemic.
Damn it, we ran out of gas.
But if you're upset that The Flash's first ever live-action movie doesn't do a good job of portraying the character's main selling point, then good news, there's a solution. For most of the movie, it just doesn't fucking use it. The main plot of the film involves the Flash going back in time to save his mother's life, and also save his father who's wrongly convicted of killing her. While in the past, he ends up meeting his younger self and tries to recreate the accident that gave him powers. They succeed, but the original Flash gets exposed to the accident too and ends up losing his powers.
I'm slow.
I understand that this was done so that Barry can't just time travel back to the present, but did you have to rob him of his main superpower to do it? I mean, throughout the movie, the world is in danger, so why not make that the reason why he stays? Have him travel back to the present, find that the world has become an apocalyptic hellscape, and travel back again to figure out what happened. It doesn't even contribute to any kind of character arc that Barry goes through, and the movie places very little focus on him getting his powers back. It's not like it happens because of any kind of development or personal growth. Essentially, the movie just kind of chugs along for a while until the filmmakers eventually decide,
Alright, I think we're good here. I think that's enough.
What?
That's
What are
enough.
you talking about?
but hey, we've still got the younger Barry and he's got powers now, that's gotta make up for it.
What?
Well, just because the movie still has a Speedster character, that doesn't mean he gets put to good use. Most of the movie just consists of the two Barrys standing around and talking, which doesn't make for many running opportunities. Hell, even the opportunities it does have, it doesn't really take advantage of. Look at this scene, for example. The two Barrys, alongside Batman, invade a Siberian base to rescue a prisoner they think is Superman. This being young Barry's first experience using his powers in battle, it doesn't exactly go well as a whole. So Barry gets shot in the leg, making him unable to run. I'm on board with the idea of diminishing a character's powers for an action scene to add tension. It can be interesting to see how they adapt when their usual tricks stop working. But when the movie as a whole has spent such little time using the Flash's abilities in compelling ways, taking the powers away altogether at a point when the film has a chance to do something worthwhile just comes across as wasteful. But the Flash's powers are really only one side of his character. There's also his personal life, consisting of his parents, his relationships, and his job. But pretty much all that gets tossed aside for most of the story and doesn't get the attention it deserves. Barry's work and romantic life may as well not even be here, because as soon as he goes back in time 30 minutes into the movie, they play zero role in the story from that point on. The only issue that comes up concerning Barry's job is that he's constantly late to work because he's secretly off saving the world.
No. Let me guess. Your alarm clock didn't go off. Oh, your dog ate your alarm clock.
So basically the opening from Spider-Man 2.
Go get me a coffee.
But the thing is, in Spider-Man 2, Peter Parker's superhero life conflicting with his personal life is like the main point of the movie that his entire character arc revolves around. It isn't something that gets brought up in the first 15 minutes and then never mentioned again. Barry's romantic life involves a blossoming relationship with a reporter named Iris West. Well, not so much blossoming and more just having a couple of minor conversations until Barry decides he's got better shit to do. Iris West originally appeared in the Zack Snyder cut of Justice League, a movie that I personally really like, but I admit I was a little disappointed that she didn't seem to play much of a role in the plot despite the trailers making a point of showing her. At the time, my assumption was that they were introducing her in that movie so that she could be properly fleshed out here. And maybe that was the intention originally, but then cut to 2023 and the story that the movie follows does not have a use for her. And so her inclusion here just feels like they gave her the bare minimum of obligation. Like, okay, the previous movie established her, I guess we better include something, let's just get her out of the way as quickly as possible.
I had a really great time, by the way. We should do this again.
But we probably won't. The only thing I kind of like about her existence in the film is this moment that implies the Snyder Cut is canon.
I feel like we saw each other. Like a few years ago, right?
No, because we haven't seen each other since college.
Then there's the little matter of Barry's parents, which at least comparatively have more of a purpose than the other aspects of Barry's personal life because it's the thing that sets Barry's entire adventure in motion. But even then, all we get is a pretty brief and mundane flashback to Barry and his parents. Not really enough to convey how important they are to him. I felt more of a connection from Barry's dad's appearance in the Snyder Cut, and that was a minor plot point at best.
Please don't ever say that to me again.
I'll give credit that I think the final scene Barry has with his mother is handled pretty well, and I actually got emotionally invested, but for the sake of avoiding spoilers I won't go into it. But looking into that relationship as a whole, it feels a bit lacking. And not content with just wasting the Flash, the movie also brings back Michael Keaton's Batman from his neon and nipple-induced coma.
You want to get nuts? Let's get nuts.
And to be frank, the movie really does not justify him being there. The movie is sort of going for a similar premise as Spider-Man No Way Home, with the older take on a character coming back to help the new generation. Except in No Way Home, the inclusion of Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield actually contributes to Spider-Man's character arc. The older Peters show how they've learned from their past mistakes and pass those lessons on to the younger Peter. Here though, Batman doesn't pass down any life lessons, and there's no real reason why this had to be Michael Keaton's version of the character specifically. The filmmakers could have put fucking Lego Batman in his place and the plot would have been pretty much the same.
You want to get nuts? Come on, let's get nuts.
On top of that, I have my issues with the way he's portrayed. Sometimes he feels in line with the 1989 and 1992 movies, but not so much at other times. The first time we see him begins with a fight scene, not accompanied by the dark, theatrical, and triumphant Danny Elfman theme from the Michael Keaton Batman movies, but instead to the tune of 25 or 6 to 4 by Chicago. Then the scene moves on to a conversation between Bruce and Barry, but instead of taking advantage of the premise of seeing Keaton's Batman for the first time in years and seeing how his own distinct take on Batman's personality has evolved, the scene instead focuses on delivering exposition about time travel in the multiverse.
Some strands run almost parallel, and others that are just wildly divergent.
You know, Keaton's Batman being well known for his knowledge of quantum mechanics. He doesn't really have much of a character arc either. They establish that through some blatantly unexplained circumstances that Batman is no longer needed and he's become a shut-in as a result.
Things have changed. Gotham's now one of the safest cities in the world.
That's it? Things have changed? That's the best you could come up with? He eventually agrees to help because he sympathizes with Barry trying to save his parents. That's a good motivation for a character like Batman, since he lost his own parents and wants to make sure that nothing like that ever happens to anyone else. But if it was that easy to convince him to help, then what was the point of him being reluctant in the first place? It's a conflict that lasts all of a few minutes. To be clear, I'm not opposed to seeing characters like Michael Keaton's Batman making a return, especially in cases like this where their story got derailed because of behind-the-scenes drama. It could be good to see some kind of proper conclusion. But Keaton's Batman in this movie barely has a beginning of a character arc, let alone an end. And when he doesn't contribute much to Barry's arc either, it takes a character return that should feel like a new evolution and instead just makes it feel hollow. And that kind of extends to the rest of the guest appearances in this movie as well. Ben Affleck's Batman makes a brief appearance and has an admittedly cool action scene at the start of the film. The choreography is over the top, but also just grounded enough to suspend my disbelief, and I'd love to see more action scenes like it in future live-action movies featuring Batman. It feels like something straight out of a comic book, but this action scene is completely unrelated to the main plot, and it feels like Batman is really only here to just establish the status quo so that we feel the contrast when Keaton shows up. Wonder Woman shows up to serve as Batman's personal deus ex machina and then disappears for the rest of the movie, and Aquaman shows up in a post-credit scene to get drunk and fall in a puddle.
Alright, come on.
You know, DC, these were the first two characters in the DCEU to have movies that pretty much everyone liked. I would think you'd want to make their existence a little more meaningful than this. For the record, I also really like Man of Steel, but that's beside the point. Besides them though, Michael Shannon's General Zod comes back as well. Now, I actually really liked Zod in Man of Steel. He was a complex and interesting character in that he was a vicious and barbaric killer, but also had his own sense of responsibility to his people, as misguided as he was.
And every action I take, no matter how violent, is for the greater good of my people.
In this movie though, they don't even bother to develop his personality any further, or even just show more of the personality that we already had. The filmmakers seemingly just expect you to take the interesting aspects of Zod from Man of Steel and transfer them over to this movie in your head instead of the film actually doing that for real. The only reason he exists in the story at all is essentially just to be a plot device so that the characters have something to stop. You could have replaced him with any other previous DCEU villain and you would get the same effect. Well, okay, maybe I'm being too harsh. I mean, there is one character that's affected by the inclusion of General Zod. That being Supergirl, the cousin of Superman, who in this timeline escaped to Earth alongside him when he was a baby, only for her to be captured by the Siberian government for being an extraterrestrial. Because of this, Zod was able to capture Super Baby and kill him. That of course leads to Supergirl forming an intense hatred for both Zod and humans, and leads to some actually pretty strong drama and ultimately character development where she learns that the Earth is worth fighting for and so helps the Flash to save it. Well, I say that assuming that the multiverse is real, because that timeline where the movie gives Supergirl any attention at all is probably out there somewhere. But here in our reality, Supergirl is barely even a character, and just exists to add more underdeveloped characters to the pile. She never interacts with her cousin on screen, so there's no emotional connection from the audience's perspective, and by extension, there's no personal tension with Zod. And her hatred of humans gets resolved pretty easily. She claims that she hates them and doesn't care about Zod killing them.
But I'm not a human. I'm a Kryptonian.
But then changes her mind when she sees Zod killing them. Feel like she knew that already, but okay. And her conflict with Zod and her relationship with Earth never go anywhere and never get a resolution, so what is the point in any of it? The last thing I want to talk about is the conclusion of what can loosely be described as Barry's character arc. Skip to the time on screen if you want to avoid spoilers.
But I don't need to know. Sorry, can we move on?
So during the battle against General Zod, pretty much everything goes wrong. Batman and Supergirl get killed, and the only thing the two Barrys can think to do is reverse time until they get it right, eventually resulting in the entire multiverse starting to converge in on itself to the brink of complete destruction. This leads to present-day Barry realizing that saving his mother isn't worth the amount of harm that it will cause to all other life in existence. That has the potential to be a hugely impactful moment for his character, but this being the Flash 2023 from Warner Brothers Pictures and DC Studios, they can't focus on a silly thing like the main character's arc because they're too focused on shoving in cameos like George Reeves as Superman, and Christopher Reeve as Superman, and Helen Slater as Supergirl, and Nicolas Cage as Superman, and Adam West as Batman, and Teddy Sears as the Flash. Okay, editor's note, apparently that's not actually Teddy Sears, my bad.
You don't stop talking. It's not charming.
Now, people have rightly criticized this scene for multiple reasons, like the terrible CGI or the morality of using the likenesses of dead actors who obviously can't give consent.
That's rude.
But when I first watched this scene, there was an issue I had with the cameos that I haven't really seen anyone else address. The timing. The point of using these actors' likenesses for a scene like this is essentially for a fun bit of spectacle. And to a certain extent, it is kind of cool getting to see Nicolas Cage's Superman finally appearing on the big screen. It even features him fighting a giant spider like he was originally supposed to. But there's a time and place for fun cameos like this, and it's not during a big dramatic scene where the main character chooses to sacrifice his mother's life to save the world. Throughout the scene, these cameos aren't really fun or endearing, they're just distracting. And when you get down to it, that's pretty much the movie as a whole. Like I said, the DCEU's version of the Flash is the only version of the character that I'm highly familiar with. I would have loved to have come out of this movie being able to call myself a fan of the Flash. After all, I liked him in the Snyder Cut, so there was potential after that movie laid a good foundation. But making me a fan of The Flash doesn't seem to be what this movie considered important. It's not focused on telling a good story with this character, or doing cool and amazing things with his powers, or getting me invested in the supporting characters that exist in his life. Its main priority seems to be cramming in as many characters from the DC multiverse as it possibly can. Story or emotional payoffs be damned. And in that regard, it succeeded. I'm struggling to see the appeal of that, but it succeeded. Here's hoping that Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom at least ends the series on a high note, but after the last few movies, I'm not holding my breath. Either way, James Gunn's new DC universe cannot come soon enough at this point. But speaking of the future, if you want to see my future videos before they get released on YouTube, check out my Patreon page in the description below. Dostoevsky.